You know, we've all had to deal with a difficult neighbor at some point. But what happens when that quiet gossip, those whispers over the fence, escalate into something way more damaging? Today, we're diving into a story about that exact line, the line between just words and something much worse, and importantly, what the law has to say about it.
When you get down to it, there are really only two ways to handle a disagreement. There's what you might call the dignified path, right? Where adults talk things out, you go to the person, you clear the air. But then there's what our story calls the code of shadows. And that's a whole different world, one that runs on whispers, half-truths, where the goal is never, ever to find a solution.
So, this code of shadows, what does that even mean in practice? Let's actually pull apart the tactics of someone who operates this way.
Okay, so a person like this, a shadow actor, they don't actually want a conversation. They'd much rather gossip behind your back. And they're smart about it. They spread these little bits of information to entire groups, building this web of negativity. See, they're not looking for a solution. They're looking for an audience. And the craziest part, to them, all this conflict, it's fun.
And get this, when the aggressor in this story was asked, "Why don't you just talk to your neighbor directly?" This was her exact answer. "Why should I? This is more fun." Wow, that single sentence just tells you everything, doesn't it? This isn't about some actual problem, it's about getting a kick out of someone else's pain.
And we have to be really, really clear on this point. This kind of behavior, it's not a failed attempt to communicate. It is a successful attempt to cause harm. The whole point is to slowly chip away at a person's reputation, to isolate them, all while using these cheap, totally cowardly tactics. Okay, so this brings us to a really critical turning point in the story, because this isn't just about hurt feelings anymore or some petty neighborhood drama. There is a very real legal line, and it is so important to know exactly when that line gets crossed. So, let's ask the big question. At what point does all this backstabbing and rumor spreading go from just being awful and unpleasant to being straight up illegal? Well, the answer has a legal name: defamation. And the definition is pretty simple. It's spreading false rumors with the specific intent of damaging someone's reputation. The law doesn't see this as some harmless game. No way. It sees it for what it is: a punishable, illegal social evil. And look, this usually happens in stages. It's one thing to have a negative opinion, whatever, but it's another thing entirely to start spreading blatant lies, like telling people someone is unstable. From there, it often escalates to just making up entire stories from scratch. And then finally, when you start mocking and provoking that person in public based on those lies, you have definitely crossed deep into illegal territory. All right, let's just pause for a second and shift our focus. What's it actually like to be on the receiving end of all this? We have to understand the victim's perspective here. And here's a really powerful idea from the story. We so often see a victim's silence and think it's weakness, or that they're just accepting it. But that's not it at all. It's patience. It's a conscious choice to watch, to endure, and to wait for the exact right moment to take action. I mean, the contrast here is just night and day. The aggressor's power is built on pure cowardice. They would never, ever have the guts to say any of this to the person's face. But the victim's strength, that comes from a deep reserve of patience and the eventual realization that, you know what, patience runs out and the law is there for a reason. So, what happens when that patience finally snaps? Well, that's when the whole game changes. That's when the truth starts coming out and those shadows start to disappear. And the path to getting justice is actually a pretty clear process. First, the rumors get to a point where they're just intolerable. That's when the victim's patience breaks. And then, this is the most important part, they start gathering evidence. Screenshots, witnesses, anything and everything that proves the lies. With that proof, they go to the law. And just like that, the power flips. The bully, who is so confident hiding in the dark, starts to totally panic. Because in the end, all that hiding and whispering, it just crumbles when it's faced with the hard, undeniable truth, especially when that truth has the law standing right behind it. The shadows just weren't big enough to hide in anymore. So, after going through this whole story, what's the one thing we should really walk away with? What's the main point? Here it is, the bottom line. This isn't just about being rude or being a bad neighbor. A person who intentionally makes up lies and spreads rumors to hurt somebody is committing a crime. It is that simple and it is that serious.
And that really leaves us with one last thing to think about. This story proves that these cowardly, shadowy tactics, they only work in the dark, where there's no accountability. So the question for all of us is, when we're faced with our own conflicts, how are we going to choose to bring them into the light?